Welcome to today's podcast. My name is Pearl Brewer and I will be your host. Today is a very special podcast, one that we will be releasing on the 28th of April. April the 28th is a day of mourning, a day that has been chosen to remember those who have been injured or died on the job in Canada. Today's podcast guest is Leica Gahan. Leica is the mother of Jordan Gahan, who died tragically on March the 14th, 9 years ago. Leica describes this date as a painful reminder of the worst day of her life. Welcome, Leica, and thank you for agreeing to share your story with our listeners.
Thank you, Pearlie, for having me.
Leica, tell us about Jordan so we can better understand what he was like.
Jordan was he was a typical toddler, busy and full of life. And I had Jordan on October 23rd, 1992, and 18 months later I had my second son, Jonathan. And the two of them they just loved trucks and construction equipment, dirt, mud, tree houses. They used to swim in any body of water, be it muddy, whatever. They were just great little boys, kept me very busy. One of the greatest reminders of Jordan was when he started kindergarten when he was 4 years old. And one day I picked him up at school and he said, "Mom, I signed up for a talent show." And he goes, "Mom, what is it?" And I said, "Well, Jordan, it's when you stand in front of the school and you do a talent or something that you enjoy." "Oh, okay, good, Mom. I'm going to do karate." But Jordan had never been trained in karate, but anyways, the long and short of it, this was kind of an epiphany of what Jordan was going to be like the rest of his life. Because Jordan, we would take a ski lesson, and the rest of the family would be in the bunny hill, and Jordan would be on a black diamond before the end of the day. Jordan, when he was little, he wanted to be a professional bass fisherman. I actually wanted him to meet Bob Azumi, but that didn't actually happen. But there was so many things he wanted to be the best at whatever he attempted. And he loved to fish. Even to this day, I remember a fishing hole that he used to like to fish in, and every time I drive by there, I think of my son. His truck would be parked there and he would be fishing after work. Jordan went to Barker's Point Elementary, went on to Devon Middle, and he went on to Leo Hayes High School. In grade 12, they were doing a pilot project doing a pilot project called the Seniors Project, and that's where a student could do something that was self-directed. They didn't have to sit in the classroom. They could do a project, and you had to be accepted into this program. And Jordan talked to me about it, and he said, "Mom, I want to build a race car." Well, some students developed diets. Some students did some fundraising for a nonprofit. There was a lot of great ideas, and Jordan built a race car in his grade 12 year of high school. I'll back up a little bit. The background on that was my husband bought a race car when Jordan was 9 years old. And Jordan used to work on the race car all the time. So he was around the racing community and all that. And Jordan, we started racing in Gary, New Brunswick at Speedway 660. And Jordan we'd always have to sit in the stands, and Jordan couldn't work on the race car at the racetrack because of his age. They had insurance liability, wouldn't allow him in. Well, over the years, he ended up getting advance permission to get into the pits because he was so advanced, so used to working on the race car through the week, and they allowed him to get in. So that was the start. After high school, Jordan went to New Brunswick Community College and took civil engineering technology. He spent a year in Moncton, And then they offered the same program in Fredericton, so we moved back to Fredericton. And during that year, I didn't know this, but Jordan had applied to attend a racing school in North Carolina. And I didn't know anything about this until one night he called me. He was out with his friends and he told me that he had got accepted in this racing school in North Carolina. And I thought, oh my goodness, like this is crazy. And he actually got a scholarship to boot. So we spent the next 6 months flying back and forth to Denver, North Carolina, just outside of Charlotte, for this racing school. And Jordan excelled at that. He graduated and did very well. And of course, at that point, our 2 race cars, he was doing all the setup and everything for the race cars. And yeah, he lived a pretty tremendous life.
Now, did he also, you run a construction company on the side, your husband and so on?
Yes, we did.
Did he work for that as well?
Yes. My boys, ever since I met my husband in 1991, we had a construction company, and it just grew and grew. And both of the boys, Jordan was more interested in the heavy equipment operation than my other son initially. Jordan was... They loved being around the equipment and everything, and they were always around it. So, yeah, and Jordan did work for our construction company in the summers while he was in school, and he did work for our construction company after school and on his summer holidays and things like that.
So, like a lot of kids, he headed out west. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, Jordan had, actually, knowing Jordan the way he was, he asked my opinion and everything, but I learned early on that I really had to let Jordan spread his wings, because Jordan never, like even the Race 101, I mean, we had to fly to North Carolina for 8 or 10 weekends, and obviously I knew this wasn't going to be a career for him. He didn't want to do it as a career. It was a hobby. But his desire was to race. He loved to race. And so when he got done school, his girlfriend had also completed her course that she was taking. And Jordan knew that there was a big financial commitment with racing. Frankly, the more money you put in, the more competitive you are. And his cousin that he was really close to was living in Edmonton. And Jordan said, Mom, I really would like to go. And he had applied for jobs, and he before he left, he had a opportunity to go to work for a company. They were going to watch him and supervise him, and he just, I remember that day. He left on August 10th. It was my husband and I's anniversary, and watching that little hatchback drive out of the yard. Like, I remember opening up the back, and his girlfriend's shoes all fell out. Anyways, it was a hard day.
Yeah.
And just because I knew I had to let him go, and I knew that I had to give him the wings to fly, because he was going to do it, and he was going to be great at it. And I just prayed through it.
So he ended up out west, worked at what out there?
Jordan was a heavy equipment operator. He especially, ironically, when he decided to go to school at NBCC, he took civil engineering technology, because I really wanted him to, I kind of wanted him to wear the white hat on the job site, right? Mm-hmm. And, but he told me he didn't want to be that. He didn't want to do that. He goes, he really wanted to run equipment. And so when he went out west, he went on this interview. They asked him to operate the equipment. And they said, we'll watch you, Jordan, for 15 minutes. And after 7 minutes, they said, you got the job. And it didn't surprise me because he had been around it for a long time. He had run heavy equipment. And although I can't really judge his aptitude as how he operates equipment and things like that, but my husband certainly could. And he knew that he was very well qualified and very capable of doing the work that he did, even at a young age.
Okay. Now, can you tell us about how long he had been out there?
And Jordan went, he left here August 10th. He started work shortly thereafter. And he had worked at one of the jobs for 3 or 4 months, but then it was more seasonal in nature. So he had applied for a camp job because he wanted to stay out there for the winter. And he ended up getting a job. And I was really thrilled because it was kind of a small construction company as well. And it was kind of a mom and pop organization. And I remember we were talking and the first day that he was to report to work, he worked as a subcontractor for Suncor. And the boss had given Jordan the company vehicle to drive to Suncor site. And I just thought, what a wonderful testament to my young man. And the principal of the company told me that Jordan reminded him of himself because he had sort of learned how to run a construction company from his dad, and then Jordan was doing the same thing. Jordan he spent probably a week in updating all of his safety records and all that stuff. And he was on his way, living in a camp and in a camp room. And I remember I had a BlackBerry at the time, and I wanted to FaceTime him. And so I switched to iPhone, which was a big jump for me. And we FaceTimed when he got to his camp, and he goes, Mom, it's small, and there was a pile of clothes in the corner. And I said, Jordan, are those clean clothes or dirty clothes? Oh, Mom, just a kind of a combination of both. And I thought my boy was but doing well, enjoying. He had an apartment in Edmonton. He would work, it's vague to me now, I think 10 or 11 days, like 7 or 8 days on and 4 days off or whatever. So he was in constant communication with my husband, and my husband always knew what he was doing and what kind of work he was doing, and they always talked about that. I talked to him all the time as well, but it would be about, how are you feeling, what are you doing, how's work, and I remember one time I was saying, so Jordan, did you tell all the guys that you work with that you drive a race car, that you have a race car? No, Mom. And he was just so humble about everything. And I said, well, I want to come out. I want to come and see you in Edmonton and see where you work. Well, Mom, you can't just come here whenever you want. It's a secure site and all that. And I said, well, I want to see my baby. And he goes, Mom, I'm not a baby here. I'm a man.
So that dreadful day, March the 14th, tell us about that day.
Well, it was just like any other day. I had actually was talking to Jordan earlier that day. Jordan was on his last rotation and he was coming home. So he had flew from the executive airport to Firebag, Alberta, I think that Wednesday before. And so he was on his last rotation and he was going to be home. And I think my husband and I were actually going to go out and come back with him. My memory is vague in that, but I was so excited. He was coming home and he was getting his race car ready, and because it was racing season in May. So, and it took some time he had saved a lot of money and he was excited about getting home, and I don't think he would have gone back. that Friday, my husband and I were working, we were doing a mulching contract on Route 8. And it was a normal Friday. I left work a little early, started supper, and my husband came in shortly thereafter, and we had supper, and that time was, we were just making plans for the weekend. My other son was out with his friends for the evening, and I think it was around 10:30 at night, and 10 o'clock around, my other son came in, and I acknowledged that, and I was just sleeping, and I heard car doors slam in the front of my house, and I looked out, and there was 2 RCMP cars. And of course I hollered to my other son, and I said, Jonathan, I said, there's 2 RCMP cars here, like, what's going on? And, well, I don't know, Mom, I never did anything. So I went to the door, and 3 RCMP are standing there, and they asked for my husband. And I said, yeah, he's here. And he came out, and then that's when he told us that Jordan had died earlier that day, like a few hours before that. That he was running an excavator in a burrow pit, and it had fallen through the ice, and there was 12.5 feet of water over the cab, and Jordan's hard hat floated up, but he drowned. That day.
Devastating news for the family.
Hysterical. Just absolutely hysterical. I just can't tell you. The next few hours were just... I wasn't very nice to the RCMP officers. I wasn't very nice. I told them that they were wrong. They had made a mistake. I was just talking to them. I was just beyond. You just can't even fathom. It was just so surreal. And like there's just, those men were so wonderful, and they were so wonderful, and I've spoken to all of them since, actually. They were crying too. They were crying. Yeah, like my husband and family. Then our neighbors started coming, and it was just horrible. And then I knew that I had to call people. I had to tell people. And one of the hardest calls that I ever had to make was to call my mom. It was that particular day. She had she was doing some fundraising for Alzheimer's, and they had a big dinner planned for that day. And I had to call her. I mean, I don't think I called her till like 5 o'clock in the morning. But I remember those calls as being the hardest. Like, it was just, it's a blur. I just can't even, I just don't even know what to say about that. It was just, victim services came and they helped us, and they were talking about a funeral and all that, and I'm like, what? Like, I just couldn't wrap my head around it. My 21-year-old son was in Northern Lights Hospital, deceased, and I was in New Brunswick. You just can't even. He was all alone. Like, I just think about that. I'm thankful I had a really great friend of mine that was there that just sort of took took things by the hand and just walked me through those days, and I don't know where I would be. Just allowed me to, like, it's just so out of order. You just never expect it.
So we had a chance to get together here a couple of weeks ago and talk, and you also talked about Threads of Life, a lady you met there that also helped you through those tough times.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly after there was a lot of people that I reached out to after, but I mean, we initially, Jordan's body never came home until the following Thursday. So, I mean, the wake and the funeral and all of that. And Jordan had, there was a lot of publicity around his death. There was a lot of media that were speaking to some of our family members, which I was so thankful, because I was not in a state of talking to anybody. But because Jordan had done so, was racing and things, like there was a lot of news coverage on him. So Jordan actually was written up in Maclean's magazine, which I was so honored. But so through the next few weeks and months, it was my church family. It was Threads of Life. I reached out to Threads of Life, knowing that, well, whatever, and it ended up being a life-saving opportunity. I had a lady that Threads of Life chose a person that would be, I don't even know how they do the choosing, but they picked a perfect match for me. She had also lost her son in Alberta, I believe. Yes, she did, in Alberta. And she called me every Wednesday to touch base with me. And like, I remember it was 11:30 my time she would call, and I would be waiting for my phone to ring. And I shut everything else out. Nothing else mattered. And I would talk to her. Sometimes I'd talk to her for 2 hours. Like, we'd go back and forth. But she'd already walked through this journey, everything. And she knew how I was feeling. And it was life-saving for me. And I think she gave me the strength to be able to walk through all the things that I had to walk through. And she encouraged me and just listened to me and understood me. And it was perfect. It was just a blessing.
You talked to me when we were talking earlier about the wake for your son and the number of people that showed up.
Yeah, like at the wake, the funeral director had called me, and well, when we were arranging the wake, I brought, like, Jordan loved racing, he loved fishing. So, I mean, we actually had a fishing section, we had a racing section, and I mean, flowers and gifts and just tremendous. We had taken over that funeral home and I'm sure that the funeral director remembers it to this day. They asked us to come. The wake was 2 to 4 and 7 to 9, which is typical. But that morning he called me and he said, "Lisa, I believe you should come a little early because people are lining up already." And this was like 12:30. So it ended up that they opened the doors early and we were there till midnight.
Wow.
Thousands of people came. And a friend of mine added it up, but it was close to 3,000 people came through the doors of your funeral home. And so they suggested we change the venue for the funeral because it was going to be at Corbett Avenue Wesleyan Church, where we all went to church. So we ended up moving it to Journey Wesleyan, and they accepted us open arms. And I laugh about this now, but at the time, the funeral director came to me and he said, "Lisa," he goes, what articles from this, like, what flowers would you like me to take to Journey Wesleyan? What would you like normally, like, what would you like us to take to the church for people? And I said, "Everything." And he said, "Everything?" And I said, "Yeah, everything." Well, months later, we laughed about it because he said, like, 3 or 4 carloads of stuff. And, like, I walked in and he made sure was everything displayed properly? Like I had picture boards. We had the hood of his race car. I mean, it was just phenomenal, really. And then after the funeral, he said to me, "So Lisa, what would you like to do with the flowers?" He said, "Typically, our staff, we go and we deliver them to nursing homes and things like that." And I said, "No, I want to keep them." He goes, okay, all right, Mrs. Gahan. And so probably 2 or 3 days later, I called and he asked me to come and pick up the flowers. And probably because they were taking up so much room at the funeral home. And there too, I had 2 carloads of flowers. So I personally delivered the flowers to the nursing homes. And I look back now and I've worked him to death. I worked the funeral director to death. But all these are building blocks to getting through the worst time of your life. And I'm so thankful for all those little things that were big then that helped me, that helped my family and I.
When did the prosecution process start after that?
Well, it started right away. And in Alberta they have up to 2 years delay charges if charges are going to be laid. I was in touch with the investigator right away. But like we all know that my mind started after Jordan was home and the funeral was over. Of course, that was when my mission started about the prosecution, like what's going to happen, like what the investigation and things like that. There's a lot of things that I could share. I wanted to get more information and I couldn't get it and all this, but nevertheless, I was worried about that my investigator would be good. I wanted to make sure she was good. And there too, my family support worker from Threads of Life, she was the same investigator that they had on her son's death, praise God, and she was phenomenal. And so I was in touch with her right away. She kept me abreast of every step along the way, what was happening. And like I remember her just calling me out of the blue one day, several times actually. "Lisa, I'm just going to another fatality today of a 28-year-old from maybe Nova Scotia, maybe." And she says, "I thought about you. How are you doing?" And so she was a really great investigator. And charges were laid like 3 days before the 2-year mark was up. They did end up going to court several times throughout that 2-year process. But, and I would have, trust me, I would have flown to Alberta every time. Or I would have moved to Alberta. That's how much I was passionate about making sure that I knew everything about the day my son died. I had documented everything about my son's life. I have pictures and I have scrapbooks. And I wasn't going to stop. That now I needed to know. I needed to be part of it. And so, but they would call me after and tell me what happened in the court hearing. But I remember thinking, sitting at home, they're in a Calgary courtroom right now talking about my son.
That must have been tough.
Tough.
All the way through the process.
It was very hard.
You're not there.
It was very hard, but I just knew that I had to just keep plugging away and making sure that there wasn't any stones unturned, and that I knew as much as I could know about what happened that day. And I just demanded being part of the process. I felt like I worked so hard and I fought so hard that actually by the time we went to court, I felt a sense of relief. Because the mission was done. It was over. And I could kind of just it was done. And my son could rest in peace, and I knew that I had did everything I could for him. So.
Well, what was the outcome of the prosecution?
They were charged with 5 counts. I think 2 or 3 were thrown out, but they were fined $100,000. But they had 20. They used restorative justice in Alberta, so they had 25 or 26 different things that they had to do in order to satisfy. Like they had to attend training this, training that. Like there was several different things. I can't even remember all of them. But ironically, and in Jordan style, the court hearing was on 3 years after he died on April 28th, on the National Day of Mourning. We were in a Calgary courtroom. You just can't even make it up. I mean, and I had an opportunity to talk to CBC and a few other media outlets prior to going into court, and it was hard. We read victim impact statements. I had the company that my son worked for, they cared about him. They didn't intend for this to happen. They were as good as they could be under the circumstances. You understand that my son died in Alberta, and he had an apartment, and his clothes was at the camp room, right? They facilitated flying his girlfriend and his first cousin home to us. They flew them back to Alberta. They facilitated packing up his camp room and facilitated sending his personal belongings home. My good friend Kim, she picked it up at the airport. Like I never opened up Jordan's personal belongings till after he was gone, about 3 years. But there was so many things that they had done showing kindness to our family, and in the courtroom was the most poignant part of it was when Susan Brayford, the principal, one of the owners of the company, she wanted to address us directly, and she asked the judge if she could turn around. Normally you would address the judge, but she turned around and addressed us, and that was a really special moment, because I knew that she was hurting as well, and she was troubled by what had happened, and it was not easy for them, and it was terrible for them. It changed them forever. It changed their job, changed their life forever. I understand. I'm sad that this happened to my family. I'm sad that my life, my family, my boys, I only have one left. But I've heard stories of other fatalities and other injuries where people aren't treated the same level of respect. And so I have gratitude that they were kind, and they still continue to donate every year to Threads of Life in Jordan's memory. They wanted to fly out to his funeral, all of the staff, there wasn't that many, 13 or 14, I think. But I just wasn't prepared for that. I didn't know how. I was a mixed, I didn't know how I'd react. But they had a memorial service out there for Jordan.
Now talk to us about the letter that you requested that they prepare for the local newspaper.
The letter.
There was a letter or a statement from the company that appeared in the Daily Gleaner.
Yeah. Well, oftentimes, oftentimes people in the safety realm would, like, especially, we all have concerns about young workers, right? Young workers, the employers have a greater responsibility to orientate them, and we hiring young workers poses a whole different bunch of challenges. Well, in Jordan's case, people interviewed Brayford Trucking about, well, Jordan was only 21 years old. Don't you think that probably attributed to his death? And they stood firm on that. They said Jordan was young, very young, and much younger than what we would normally put in that level of responsibility. But he was more capable he was very, very capable. He was in the biggest machine, and he was very capable of doing the work that he was doing. And it wasn't really a surprise to my husband and I, because I know that my husband wouldn't have put him there or allowed him to be in a risky situation. He was very capable. And I was thankful that they took that position, because I think they had been questioned about it several times. He was only 21, don't you think that, but they cleared that up, and I was thankful for that.
Since that day, you've been very, very actively involved in continuing to promote health and safety.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that. Even actually, I'd like to ask you to go back even before your son was injured.
Right.
You were very active in health and safety. Why don't you start there?
Sure. Well, in 2009, 2008 or 9, I started developing the health and safety program for my husband's construction company. And I just sort of, I was just building. I just felt the need that I knew that it was something that we really needed to do. I think in 2010, I started taking courses, and by 2012, everything was up and running. 2011, 12, everything was up and running. We were safety certified, and I really had a thirst for learning about health and safety. And for me, I had been around heavy equipment my whole life, but I was nervous. But I really didn't understand all the risks. Like, say for instance, an excavator or a bulldozer. What are things that can go wrong? And I found that when I talked to heavy equipment operators, they never were really that specific. I needed some real hard, what happens if a hydraulic hose blows? What if, right? So I started just actually researching manufacturers' specifications, and I really started doing my own work, because I don't think people that run equipment every day, and they either they can't formulate a good health and safety practice, or they might not be able, they're so close to it they can't articulate it. Well, I needed to get to the bones of it. And so I did. And then I started developing health and safety, safe work practices for all the pieces of equipment we have. And we've got a lot: graders, bulldozers, forklifts, the whole 9 yards. And then I sat down with the key staff, and I got them to review our safe work practices. And they noticed that, there's different sizes of batteries when you're charging a battery. There was all kinds of mechanical things that they had pointed out, which would send me back to the drawing board to research more and blah, blah, blah. And fortunately, online, there is a lot of resources as well. There's no reason why a strong health and safety program can't be developed, because the resources are available. And I found lots, even way back then, online. And so I used online resources, I used manufacturers' resources, and I developed a health and safety program. And then so Jordan and my son, both of my sons were brought up around the health and safety mindset. They watch me. They both got written up several times. My husband got written up more than anybody. we talk safety. It wasn't something that was just started. And when Jordan went out west, he called me one day. He goes, "Mom, you'll be happy to know that today I have to sit the rest of the day in the camp." And I go, "Why?" And he goes, "Because I got out of the excavator and I didn't have 3 points of contact." Good. Praise. Good. Young man, you know, right? But it gave me kind of false hope, because similarly, he was in toolbox meetings every morning. He was in the toolbox meeting from the morning that he died. So, is it just lip service? Is it just checking the box? Or is it really, really a toolbox meeting, explaining the risks and the hazards of the work that they're doing today, and giving employees the opportunity to refuse?
For all the mums and dads out there, and uncles and aunts and employers, employees listening, what are some of the health and safety messages that you want to share with them?
Well, for moms and dads, health and safety can start with little ones at home. My little grandson is 3 years old, and his favorite thing is his hard hat and his safety vest. And he has goggles as well. Sometimes he likes to wear them to the mall. Like, he doesn't really need them at the mall, but I let him go for it. Whatever he wants to do. He knows when he gets into daddy's truck that he might be working, and he'll take his hard hat and his safety vest. And he's 3 years old.
Good.
We model, parents have such a, I believe that I knew that when I was raising my children, but I see it firsthand with my grandson. I mean, if my son is whippersnipping or mowing and he doesn't have ear and foot protection on, you can model health and safety right at home. And you can create little safety conscious toddlers at a very young age. And when they get to an age where they have their first job, parents need to know what are the risks of your teenagers are doing. Like, be it McDonald's or wherever. Like, we need to ensure that our kids are safe when they're not with us. And if you've brought them up and with safety in mind, they're going to be safety leaders. And they could save somebody's life someday, as well as their own. As far as employers, you have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to provide the resources and the equipment to keep your staff safe. You have the responsibility to educate them and to ensure they understand the regulations that are related to the industry that you're in. Employees have 3 rights, and they have to be reminded of those rights. They have the right to know the dangers of the work that they are doing. They have the right to participate in the health and safety matters relating to the work that they are doing, and they have the right to refuse work that they feel uncomfortable with doing. We have to provide, the employer has to have an environment where employees feel secure enough and safe enough that they can express their own opinions, that they can refuse work that they feel uncomfortable in doing. When our health and safety program was running my toolbox meetings, that's how they started out every morning. As an employee, you have the right to know, the right to participate, and the right to refuse work that you're uncomfortable in doing. And I expect you to exercise that right. It's taken me 9 years to come to this, but I believe my son was aware of the dangers of the work that he was doing. I believe that he was, because he had expressed it to my husband. Or my husband expressed that you need to be careful. I wish my son had refused work that day. I wish there wasn't proper testing done of the ice. They were working in a burrow pit and it had various elevations. There was 2 excavators sent out that day. we could have had 2 fatalities that day, but there was only 1. But so safety is not hard. Safety doesn't cost, it pays. Employers don't realize that the psychological and mental effect and different things that happen to employees when they experience a fatality or an injury is far-reaching. I mean, it's a little bit of preventative to save a whole lot of grief later. And safety just doesn't cost, it pays in so many ways. Some of Jordan's colleagues never ever returned to work. They never returned to work. It affected a lot of people. And it's still, I hope that it still affects people to this day. I've learned since Jordan's death, I have an opportunity to sit on the Injured Workers Advisory Committee for WorkSafe. And fatalities are bad, but injuries are equally as bad. People's lives are changed because of injuries. And they're just equally as devastating. It's just a long-term devastation. Their lives are turned upside down when they can't return to the profession that they've been trained to do. And so I have a whole new insight into injuries, and despite the fact that our technology is advancing, we can do things like I do presentations virtually now, and we've made such great advances in technologies, but the statistics never change. 3 people still die every day. And there's multiple injuries. And so there is a disconnect. We need to focus on keeping each and every employee safe, and 1 person is too many.
If folks would like you to talk to the employer, to the workers, etc., you indicated to me you're more than willing to do that. Anybody listening today that wants to hear Lisa's message, I gather from our discussions you've been sharing the message whenever you get the chance.
Yes. I was early on in Threads of Life, I was trained with how to share my message so that it would have an impact. My message obviously changes, and I can certainly get into a lot more detail of what each individual company can do, or like I have lots of opportunities to share my story, but the fact is that it can happen to you, it can happen to your family, and in fact it does. Three families are going to find out today that their loved one died at work. And if my story can save somebody or give somebody the motivation or the drive to really understand safety, health and safety, and become a safety leader in their organization, that's the best thing I can do. Prevention is key. I can't save Jordan, but I can certainly share my message in hopes that people will realize that it can happen. It can happen to your family. It can happen, and it does.
And it does. Thank you very much, Lisa, for sharing your message with us. So appreciated. The big thing is we need to get your message out to folks to remind them that accidents are real. They do happen. I know when I've been doing a lot of education courses, training courses over the years, sometimes I get a sense that yes, people listen, and they hear the messages that we're trying to share, but at the same time that maybe they're thinking that, well, yes, we don't hear a whole lot about them. Yeah, I know people say they happen, but do they really? And could it happen to me? And I think when folks listen to your message, they'll very much realize that it can and that does happen. and it happens on a day-to-day basis. If you would like to get a hold of Lisa, or get in contact, I should say, with Lisa, pop us off a message, and we'll certainly put you in contact with her as well. Threads of Life have Lisa's information. Again, thank you very much, Lisa, for coming in today. Yes. We so much appreciate you sharing your message.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, folks, for listening. Tremendous message here by Leica Gahan today. Check back in a week's time, and we'll have a new podcast. Thank you very much.